A new FBI director walks into a police station, undercover, hoping to observe the officers without their masks on. But when a racist cop handcuffs him and calls him a worthless piece of trash, thinking he's just another black man to intimidate, the entire precinct is moments away from a shocking revelation that will leave them all reeling. It was a humid Wednesday morning in September, when Marcus Washington, the newly appointed FBI director, stepped out of his rental car in the heart of Riverside Heights, a mid-sized city in Georgia known more for its racial tensions than its hospitality. Dressed in a simple gray hoodie, dark jeans, and worn sneakers, he didn't look the part of a man who had just been sworn in as the youngest FBI director in the Bureau's history. That was exactly his intention. The new FBI director believed in seeing the truth behind the badge, not through sanitized reports or carefully orchestrated meetings. As a black man stepping into the highest position in federal law enforcement, he wanted to witness firsthand what communities across America had been telling federal investigators for years, that some police departments operated with impunity when they thought no one was watching. The Riverside Heights Police Department had been flagged in multiple federal complaints alleging systematic racial profiling and excessive force. Rather than send agents for a formal investigation, Washington decided to conduct his own reconnaissance. What better way to understand the problem than to experience it himself? He parked his car across from the precinct and began walking slowly through the neighborhood, observing the patrol patterns and noting how officers interacted with residents. The area was a mix of small businesses and residential streets, with a diverse population that seemed to go about their daily lives under the watchful eyes of frequent police patrols. Washington found a bench outside a corner store and sat down, pulling out his phone to make notes while appearing to scroll casually. From this vantage point he could see the precinct entrance and monitor the comings and goings of officers during shift change. He had been sitting for about 20 minutes when a patrol car pulled up to the curb. Two officers got out. One was a stocky white officer with a buzz cut, whose nameplate read, Bradley, and the other was a Hispanic officer named Martinez. They approached Marcus with the kind of swagger that suggested they were used to being obeyed without question. "Hey you," Bradley called out, his hand resting casually on his belt. "What are you doing here?" Marcus looked up calmly. "Just sitting, officer." "Is there a problem?" "There's always a problem when someone like you is loitering in this neighborhood," Bradley said, stepping closer. "We've had reports of suspicious activity around here." Washington remained seated, his voice steady. "Suspicious activity? I'm sitting on a public bench." Martinez chimed in. "Stand up. We need to see some ID." The FBI director complied slowly, reaching for his wallet, but instead of handing over his real identification, he produced a fake ID he'd prepared for this operation, one that listed him as Michael Johnson, unemployed. Bradley examined the ID with exaggerated suspicion. "Michael Johnson. Huh? What kind of work you looking for, Michael?" "Just trying to get by, officer." "Getting by?" Bradley laughed. "Is that what you call dealing drugs on street corners?" "I'm not dealing anything. I was just sitting here." Martinez moved to Washington's other side, effectively boxing him in. "You know what I think? I think you're casing these businesses, looking for something to steal." The director felt his jaw tighten, but he maintained his composure. This was exactly the kind of behavior the complaints had described. Assumptions based purely on his appearance and race. "Officers, I haven't done anything wrong. I'm happy to move along if that's what you prefer." "Oh, you'll move along all right," Bradley said with a smirk. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back." "For what? What's the charge?" "Loitering, suspicious behavior, and let's add resisting arrest when you start arguing with me." Washington knew he could reveal his identity immediately, but he needed to see how far this would go. He needed to understand the full extent of what citizens in this community faced. "I'm not resisting anything, officer, but I'd like to know what law I've broken." Bradley's face reddened. "The law that says I don't like your attitude, boy." The word hit the FBI director like a slap. He'd heard it before, of course, but never from someone who was supposed to be serving and protecting all citizens equally. "Turn around now," Martinez demanded, pulling out his handcuffs. Washington complied, feeling the cold metal close around his wrist. Small crowd had begun to gather, some filming with their phones, others just watching with expressions ranging from anger to resignation, as if this was a scene they'd witnessed too many times before. "Got another one," Bradley said loudly enough for the onlookers to hear. "These people think they can just hang around wherever they want, planning their next crime." "I haven't committed any crime," the director said firmly. "Shut up," Bradley snapped. "You'll talk when we tell you to talk." They walked him toward the patrol car, Bradley's hand gripping his arm tighter than necessary. Washington noticed how the officer seemed to be performing for the crowd, his voice louder and more aggressive than it had been initially. "Please step back," Martinez told the growing crowd of onlookers. "Nothing to see here, just cleaning up the neighborhood." An elderly black woman in the crowd shook her head sadly. "This happens every week," she said to no one in particular. Different face, same story. As they reached the patrol car, Bradley opened the back door and placed his hand on the director's head to guide him inside. But instead of the routine procedure Washington expected, Bradley suddenly shoved his head down hard against the car's roof. "Oops," Bradley said with a laugh. "Watch your head there, Michael." Pain shot through the FBI director's skull, and he felt a trickle of blood where his forehead had struck the metal. The crowd murmured angrily, but no one intervened. They'd learned that challenging police officers in this neighborhood only made things worse. "You piece of trash," Bradley whispered in Washington's ear as he pushed him into the back seat. "You and your kind need to learn your place in this town." The director said nothing, but his mind was already racing ahead to what would happen when his identity was revealed. These officers had just committed assault and battery against a federal official, all while being recorded by multiple witnesses. The ride to the precinct was filled with commentary from the front seat about cleaning up the streets and sending a message to the troublemakers. The FBI director memorized every word, every detail, every violation of protocol and basic human decency. At the precinct, the booking process began routinely enough. They took his photo, his fingerprints, and emptied his pocket. Washington had been careful to carry only the fake ID and a small amount of cash, nothing that would reveal his true identity. "Michael Johnson," the desk sergeant read from the arrest report. "Loitering and suspicious behavior. Another frequent flyer." "New to me," Bradley said, but they all looked the same after a while. The director was placed in a holding cell with two other men, one clearly homeless and intoxicated, the other a young black man who couldn't have been more than 19. "What they get you for?" the young man asked. "Sitting on a bench," Washington replied. The young man nodded knowingly. "Same thing they got me for last month. They call it suspicious loitering. I call it being black in the wrong neighborhood." The FBI director spent the next several hours observing the dynamics of the precinct. Through the cell bars he could hear officers joking about their arrests, making casual racist comments, and treating the booking process like a game where citizens were the opposing team. But Washington knew that his time in the cell was limited. At exactly 2 p.m., his phone call would be made not to a lawyer or family member, but to Deputy Director Sarah Chen at FBI headquarters. And that's when everything would change. "Johnson, Michael," the desk sergeant called out, "you get your one phone call." The director was escorted to a phone in the hallway. He dialed a number he knew by heart, and after 2 rings, a familiar voice answered. "Deputy Director Chen." "Sarah, it's Marcus. I'm at the Riverside Heights Police Department. I need you to execute Operation Oversight immediately." There was a pause. "Are you all right, sir?" "I've been better. But yes, I'm fine." "How long until you can get here?" 20 minutes. We've had a team on standby since you started this operation." "Good. Make sure you bring Agent Rodriguez in the Civil Rights Division. We're going to need them." Washington hung up and was escorted back to his cell. Now came the hardest part, waiting for the revelation that would turn this precinct upside down. 23 minutes later, the front doors of the Riverside Heights Police Department burst open. Agent Rodriguez led a team of 12 FBI agents in full tactical gear, followed by Deputy Director Chen and 2 agents from the Civil Rights Division. The precinct fell silent as the federal agents spread throughout the building with military precision. Officers stopped their conversations mid-sentence, papers scattered as hands instinctively moved away from desks, and the casual atmosphere evaporated instantly. "I'm Deputy Director Sarah Chen, FBI," she announced, her voice carrying throughout the building. "This facility is now under federal investigation. All personnel are to remain at their stations, and await further instructions. Sergeant Morrison, the shift commander, approached cautiously. "Ma'am, what's this about? We weren't notified of any federal investigation." "That's because it's been ongoing," Chen replied. "Where is your holding area? We need to locate someone immediately." "The cells are back there, but I need to see some identification." Agent Rodriguez stepped forward, badge extended. "FBI. Move!" As the federal agents made their way toward the holding cells, officers throughout the precinct began to realize that something major was happening. Bradley and Martinez, who had been laughing about their morning's arrest over coffee, suddenly looked concerned. "What do you think this is about?" Martinez whispered. "Could be anything," Bradley replied, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Chen reached the holding area and immediately spotted Marcus through the bars of the cell. He was sitting calmly on the bench, looking as composed as if he were in his own office. "Sir," she said formally, "are you injured?" Marcus touched the cut on his forehead. "Minor injuries. Nothing serious." The desk sergeant looked confused. "Ma'am, who exactly are you looking for?" Chen turned to face him, her expression stone-cold serious. "I'm looking for FBI Director Marcus Washington." The sergeant's face went white. "I'm sorry. There must be some mistake. We don't have anyone here by that name." "No," Chen said, looking directly at Marcus, "but you do have him. Officers, release that man immediately." The sergeant looked at Marcus in the cell, then back at Chen, his confusion evident. "Ma'am, that's Michael Johnson. He was arrested this morning for loitering." "That," Chen said with deadly calm, "is Director Marcus Washington, head of the and you've been holding him illegally for the past 4 hours." The silence that followed was absolute. Every officer within earshot felt their blood turn to ice. The sergeant's hands shook as he fumbled for his keys. Word spread through the precinct like wildfire. Officers gathered in the hallway, staring as the man they'd dismissed as just another arrest was revealed to be the most powerful law enforcement official in the country. Bradley pushed through the crowd, his face pale. "That's impossible. We arrested him for suspicious behavior. He had fake ID." Chen's gaze fixed on him like a laser. "You're Officer Bradley, correct? The arresting officer?" "Yes, ma'am." "But did you use excessive force during the arrest?" Bradley glanced around nervously. "I followed standard procedure." "Standard procedure includes slamming a suspect's head into your patrol car?" The blood drained from Bradley's face completely. There must be some misunderstanding." Meanwhile, Agent Rodriguez was helping Marcus out of the holding cell. As he stepped into the hallway, every officer could see the cut on his forehead and the bruises on his wrists from the handcuffs. Marcus straightened his shoulders and looked around at the assembled officers. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority that had been hidden for the past several hours. "Good afternoon. As Deputy Director Chen mentioned, I'm Marcus Washington, Director of the FBI." He paused, letting that sink in. "For the past 4 hours, I've been experiencing firsthand what many citizens in this community have reported to us: systematic harassment, racial profiling, and excessive force." The officers stood frozen, many beginning to realize the magnitude of what had just happened. Marcus continued, his voice calm but firm. "Officer Bradley, you arrested me for suspicious behavior while I was sitting on a public bench. You then assaulted me during the arrest and made multiple racist comments. All of this was witnessed by civilians and recorded on their phones." Bradley tried to speak, but no words came out. "Officer Martinez, you participated in an illegal arrest and failed to intervene when your partner used excessive force." "Sergeant Morrison, your department processed an arrest without probable cause and failed to provide adequate medical attention for an injury sustained during the arrest." Marcus walked slowly through the crowd of officers, his presence now commanding the kind of respect that should have been automatic from the beginning. "This investigation began weeks ago, following multiple complaints from citizens in this community. What I experienced today confirms every single allegation that's been made against this department." He stopped in front of a bulletin board covered with departmental notices and community policing guidelines policies that were clearly being ignored. "Effective immediately, This precinct is under federal oversight. Agent Rodriguez will be establishing a field office here to monitor all operations while we conduct a complete investigation into practices and procedures. The officers exchanged glances, the reality of their situation beginning to sink in. Marcus turned back to Bradley, who looked like he might collapse. "Officer Bradley, you're under arrest for assault on a federal officer, violation of civil rights under color of law, and false imprisonment." "Sir, please, I didn't know." "You didn't know I was FBI director. But that's not why you're being arrested." Marcus's voice remained steady. "You're being arrested because you assaulted a citizen, violated his constitutional rights, and acted with racial animus while wearing a badge. The fact that I happen to be FBI director just means you'll face federal charges instead of state ones." Agent Rodriguez stepped forward with handcuffs. "Officer Bradley, you have the right to remain silent." As Bradley was read his rights, the same rights he should have been protecting for all citizens, the other officers watched in stunned silence. Martinez was also handcuffed and arrested for his role in the illegal detention. Marcus addressed the remaining officers. "Over the next several weeks, every case, every arrest, every use of force report from this department will be reviewed by federal investigators. Officers who have acted with integrity and professionalism have nothing to fear. Those who have abused their authority will be held accountable." He paused, looking around at faces that showed a mixture of fear, shame, and in some cases, what appeared to be relief. "I became FBI director because I believe in justice. Real justice, equal justice, justice that doesn't depend on the color of your skin or the neighborhood you live in. What happened to me today happens to citizens every day, but they don't have a badge or federal agents to back them up. That changes now." Sergeant Morrison, who had remained silent throughout the revelation, finally spoke up. "Director Washington, on behalf of this department, I want to apologize." Marcus held up a hand. "Sergeant, your apology is noted, but apologies don't fix systemic problems. Results. I'll be working with Chief Patterson to implement immediate reforms, starting with mandatory retraining on constitutional rights and de-escalation techniques." He looked around the room one more time. "Some of you joined law enforcement because you wanted to serve your community. This is your chance to remember why. Others joined for different reasons: to feel powerful, to control people you consider beneath you. You won't survive what's coming." As federal agents continued to secure the building and begin their investigation, Marcus was finally able to change out of his undercover clothes and into a proper suit. The transformation was remarkable. Gone was Michael Johnson, the suspicious loiterer, and in his place stood the dignified, commanding presence of America's top law enforcement official. Deputy Director Chen approached him as he adjusted his tie. "Sir, the media is gathering outside. How do you want to handle this?" Marcus looked out the window at the growing crowd of reporters and community members. "Full transparency, Sarah. The community deserves to know what happened here today, and every other police department in the country needs to understand that we're watching." The press conference was held on the steps of the precinct, with Marcus flanked by federal agents and civil rights attorneys. He detailed his experience calmly and factually, letting the facts speak for themselves. Today's operation was not a setup or a trap, he told the assembled reporters. It was an investigation into credible complaints of civil rights violations. What I experienced is what citizens in this community face regularly: harassment, profiling, and violence based solely on the color of their skin. He showed the cut on his forehead and the bruises on his wrist. These injuries were inflicted by officers who thought they were dealing with someone who couldn't fight back, someone who didn't matter. But every citizen matters. Every person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect by those sworn to protect and serve. In the weeks that followed, the Riverside Heights Police Department underwent a complete transformation. Officer Bradley was convicted on federal charges and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Martinez, who cooperated with the investigation and showed genuine remorse, received a suspended sentence and was permanently banned from law enforcement. Sergeant Morrison retained his position but was required to undergo extensive retraining. Several other officers resigned rather than face investigation, while others embraced the changes and became advocates for community policing. Marcus established the incident as a case study for police departments nationwide, speaking at law enforcement conferences about the importance of accountability and the dangers of unchecked authority. But perhaps the most meaningful change came from the community itself. The elderly woman who had watched Marcus's arrest, Mrs. Dorothy Williams, approached him months later at a community meeting. "Director Washington," she said, "I've lived in this neighborhood for 60 years. I've seen my sons, my grandsons, and my neighbors treated the way you were treated. For the first time in decades, I believe things might actually change." Marcus smiled. "Mrs. Williams, change doesn't happen overnight, but it does happen when good people refuse to accept injustice as normal." A year later, citizen complaints against the Riverside Heights Police Department had dropped by 80%. Use of force incidents had decreased dramatically. Most importantly, community trust in law enforcement, measured through surveys and community engagement, had improved significantly. Marcus often reflected on that Wednesday morning when he sat on a bench and was arrested for the crime of existing while black. It had been one of the most difficult experiences of his career, but also one of the most important because sometimes, to fix a broken system, you have to experience its failures firsthand. And sometimes, the most powerful badge in law enforcement belongs to someone who remembers what it feels like to be powerless. The message was clear. Justice isn't just about the law. It's about how that law is applied by whom and to whom. And when justice fails, it's the responsibility of those in power to ensure it's restored, no matter how uncomfortable that process might be. In Riverside Heights, Georgia, change came not through reports or policies, but through one man's willingness to walk in his community's shoes and demand better from those who serve in uniform. And that change, hard-won and carefully protected, became a model for departments across the nation. Because real leadership doesn't just demand respect, it earns it, one difficult decision at a time.